Κορυφαία στιγμή στη σύγχρονη ιστορία της Φλόρινας αποτελεί η απελευθέρωσή της από τον τουρκικό ζυγό στις 7 Νοεμβρίου του 1912. Είναι μια στιγμή που μένει για πάντα χαραγμένη στη μνήμη μας και γραμμένη με χρυσά γράμματα στην ιστορία. Από τότε κύλησε πολύ νερό στο αυλάκι του χρόνου. Πέρασε κιόλας ένας αιώνας, στη διάρκεια του οποίου η κοινωνία μας διαμορφώθηκε. Ο τόπος μας αναπτύχθηκε, η πληθυσμιακή σύσταση μεταβλήθηκε. Γεγονότα, ευχάριστα και δυσάρεστα, καταγράφηκαν και σημάδεψαν το παρελθόν, το παρόν και το μέλλον. Η Φλόρινα γιορτάζει και η Περιφερειακή Ενότητα Φλόρινας, θέλοντας να τιμήσει αυτή τη ξεχωριστή επέτειο, προχώρησε στην παραγωγή του ντοκιμαντέρ «Πορεία στη μνήμη». Πρόκειται ουσιαστικά για ένα οδηπορικό που ξεκινά από το 1867 και φτάνει μέχρι την απελευθέρωση του Αμιντέου, της Φλόρινας και των Πρεσπών από το τουρκικό ζυγό μετά από 527 χρόνια σκλαβιάς. Το ντοκιμαντέρ περιγράφει με σαφήνεια και λεπτομέρεια και παράλληλα με την αρμόζουσα ιστορική τεκμηρίωση τα γεγονότα που προηγήθηκαν της απελευθέρωσης, ακολουθώντας βήμα-βήμα την πορεία του ελληνικού στρατού και καταλήγοντας στο Νοέμβριο του 1912. Ο σκηνοθέτης Χρήστος Σκούρας μας δίνει τη δυνατότητα μέσα από την έρευνά του και το οπτικοακουστικό υλικό που χρησιμοποιεί να αντιληφθούμε από μια άλλη οπτική γωνία εκείνη την εποχή. Γιατί έχει μεγάλη σημασία να γνωρίζουμε τα προηγούμενα, ώστε να μπορούμε να αντιληφθούμε καλύτερα τα επόμενα. Αυτός είναι και ο στόχος μας με το συγκεκριμένο ντοκιμαντέρ. Να γνωρίσουμε άγνωστες πτυχές της ιστορίας μας, να εμβαθύνουμε ακόμα περισσότερο στο κλίμα που επικρατούσε στα χρόνια πριν την απελευθέρωση. Μα πάνω από όλα, το έργο αυτό αποτελεί φόρο τιμής σε όσους αγωνίστηκαν και προσέφεραν στον τόπο, αλλά και κληρονομιά για τις επόμενες γενιές.
During the second half of the 19th century, the region of Florina is organized as Kazas, which is an administrative subdivision of the Vilayet of Monastiri. The cruel Ottoman regime of the Beydes oppressed the Christian population who seek help from the church as well as from the armed groups of Listadartes. With the term Listadartes, we characterize groups of armed Christians who in times of peace lived as thieves and in times of national wars constituted the revolutionary armed forces against the Turks. In 1867, a group of prominent Macedonians founded the new Φιλική Εταιρεία. Nikolaos Philippidis, who was the principal of the schools of Florina, took over as head of the organization. The heart and soul of the new Φιλική Εταιρεία were Anastasios Picheon, who was a teacher from Achrida, a doctor from Skúra named Argyropoulos, and Michas Tsirlis from Nymphea. Nymphea, which was at its prime at that time, becomes the center and base of the organization. But the actions of Φιλική Εταιρεία were perceived quickly by the Turks and their work remained incomplete. The Bulgarian Exarchy is founded in 1870. The Christians of Macedonia are divided in Patriarchic and those who support the Exarchy. The latter use every means to associate themselves with the Slav-speaking citizens who viewed them as Bulgarians. The dialect spoken in the region of Florina at that time was a combination of Bulgarian and Serbian with an abundance of Albanian, Vlach and Turkish elements, as well as approximately 2,500 altered Homeric words. Many Slavs speaking with Greek roots react to the pressure and stay faithful to the Patriarch. The year 1878 is one of the most significant in the history of the Macedonian Hellenism. In January, a Macedonian committee is founded in Athens in order to organize the revolt. Stefanos Dragoumis, a politician from Vougatsiko, emerges as the leader of the revolution, along with chieftain Dalipis Atvitsi, Zourkas from Nymphea, Naum Kyros and Pavlos Liatos from Antartiko, Kolepinas from Flamburo, and the legendary Captain Naoumis from Hieropygii. Before the end of the summer, the regions of Korestia, Prespes and Pisoderi are liberated. However, when the policy from Athens changed, the rebels were left helpless and their work unfinished. Nevertheless, their efforts prevented the incorporation of Macedonia to Bulgaria, which was declared an independent hegemony at that time. The first stage of the Macedonian struggle consists of the battle for education. The Bulgarian propaganda puts together schools with specially trained teachers to create and develop a feeling of national consciousness. On the other hand, the Greek schools have low-level scholars who would rather pay attention to the learning of grammar. A secret report of the Consulate of Thessaloniki in 1892 states,
to create schools with a single purpose to hire teachers, patriots who will be able to work in Macedonia for the Greek cause, just as the graduates of the Bulgarian schools fight effectively spreading the Bulgarian ideals. In the beginning of the 20th century, in the Kazas of Florina, operate 60 Greek schools and 20 Bulgarian. In 1893, a teacher from Smilevo named Damian Gruev is the leading figure in the constitution of EMEO, the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization. The objective of the organization was the preparation and training of the rebels and the concentration of supplies for the revolution. Their slogan was Macedonia for the Macedonians, a theoretical concept since the organization itself was supported by the Bulgarian diplomacy and the members were supporters of the Exarchy. The Patriarchal were not only excluded but also a target of the EMEO. At the same time, the situation in Greece was already heavy due to the bankruptcy of 1893, and nothing could be done to prevent the emerging threat. A year later, in the spring of 1894, the National Company is founded in Athens. It was a powerful organization with a wide range of supporters,
from eminent members of the Greek society to military and thousands of civilians. Pavlos Melas, a second lieutenant of the artillery, becomes a member of the company as well. Melas, who had strong bonds and interconnections with the western part of Macedonia, perceives the Bulgarian threat and brings forward the Macedonian issue as one of the priorities of the company. The recruitment of locals and Macedonians that lived in Thessalia and Phthiotida begins immediately, and they form the first armed groups for the revolt. The National Company, whose aim was the reorganization of the army, despite the economic crisis of the time, created false hopes and is greatly responsible for leading the country unprepared to war in 1897. This defeat of the Greek army made the Greeks of Macedonia understand that their freedom was in their own hands. So many chieftains emerge in the region of Florina, who with their forces protect the population from the Bulgarians. One of the leading figures was Kapitan Kotas from Roulia. He was a handyman, a farmer, a chandler, an innkeeper, even a muhtar in his hometown. He was Slav-speaking, but had strong bonds with the Greek diplomacy. He represents the main counterattack against the Turkish invaders and the Bulgarian dominion. Korestia, Prespes, Koritsa, Achrida, and Monastiri constitute the realm of Kotas, as Pavlos Melas states. And while the west side of Vitia was the realm of Kotas, the eastern one belongs to Vangelis Natsis, or Georgios from Asprogia. Natsis, who is commonly known as Trebeniotis, was initiated to the internal Macedonian revolutionary organization, but became an earnest supporter of the Patriarchate when his uncle, who happened to be a priest, was murdered by the guerrillas. With an imposing personality, he was a great warrior with leading skills who evolved into a great captain. Strebeniotis left his mark in the Macedonian struggle when he was betrayed to his death outside of the monastery of Aetos on the 20th of May 1904. A series of events that take place at the dawn of the 20th century then mark the Macedonian struggle. In 1900, the Patriarchate appointed Germanos Karavangelis as bishop in Kastoria. Karavangelis' actions give the rebels the right motivation to organize the revolt. At the end of 1902, Ion Dragoumis arrives in monastery and assumes the position of vice-consul at the Greek consulate. Dragoumis creates committees for the struggle in every town from Kastoria to Achrida.
Ο Δραγούμης απόρρεσε πώς αμέσως οργανώθηκε ο κόσμος. Μα ο κόσμος είχε πήρε, γιατί πριν είχε γίνει άλλη επανάσταση εδώ πέρα του 1878, η οποία είναι άγνωστη στον χώρο μας.
Ο Ιων Δραγούμης είχε κάνει πάρα πολύ καλή δουλειά, είχε οργανώσει την εθνική άμενα σε όλα τα χωριά, το Πρεσπόν και το Κορεστίο.
The Committee of Defense of Pistoleri was Papastavros Chamis, Lazaros Chamis, Michael Hasopoulos, Naum Liakos, Andreas Rogos, Lazaros Rouberis, Georgios Hoidis, Thomas Chamis, Theodoros Gossis and Fiskas Ioannis.
Η Επιτροπή Άμυνας Αμυντέου συναισθήθη με πρωτοβουλία του ιδίου του Ιωνα Δραγούμη. Συνεδρίαζε στο κτίριο των αδερφών Χατζή. Πρόεδρος της Επιτροπής ήταν ο Αλέξης Χατζής. Γραμματέας ήταν ο ιατρός Μιχαήλ Τολίκας, ο οποίος παρήχε ιατρικές φροντίδες περίθαλψη στους αγωνιστές.
The rest of the members of the committee were Ioannis, Stavros, Dimitris, Theophilos, Pantelis and Vangelis Hadzis. Athanasios Chasiotis, who was a teacher and a priest, was a substitute board member of the committee and a gunkeeper. On the 10th of September of 1907, 150 guns were transported from the hotel of the Hadji's family to the basement of their residence. The incident is reported in the writings of Modis and is entitled Pantsev the Bomber.
Την Επιτροπή Φλόρινας που αποτελείται από τον Γεώργιο Λουκά, τον Μενέλα Οβαλάση, γιατρό, τον Αθανάσιο Γοτλάρζη, τον Στέριο Σαπουτζή, Λάκη Πίζα, Γιάννη Ζήση, Σιάκο Γεώργιο, Κωνσταντίνο Γιαννάκη, Νικόλο Διβίτκα, Τάκη Σπύρου και Πέτρο Χατζητάση.
Παναγιώτατε, τολμόμενοι δια της παρούσης μας οι υπογεγραμμένοι κάτοικοι της Ορθοδόξου κοινότητος εξίσου, του υπαγωμένου εκκλησιαστικός μεν εις την επαρχίαν Μογλενών, πολιτικός δε στην υποδιοίκηση Φλωρίνης, να παρουσιαστούν.
The declaration that is signed by the Prestos of Xinonero to the Patriarch of Istanbul is an important document that is indicative of the situation that prevailed at that time.
Εξής ακλονίτως τας πεποιθήσεις μας και ήμεθα και θα ήμεθα αφοσιωμένοι εις ό,τι παρά των πατέρων μας ως ιεράν παρακαταθήκην ελάβομεν, εν εξίσου τη 28η Ιανουαρίου 1904.
The spring of 1903, the Macedonian Φιλική Εταιρεία is founded in Monastir. Two of the most prominent figures are Theodoros Mondis, a merchant who was murdered outside his house, and Philippos Kapetanopoulos, a pharmacist from Pyrgos Erodeas. The latter fell accompanying Melas during his third campaign. Under the pressure of the forementioned events, Athens begins to take action, and the Macedonian Revolutionary Committee is formed. The mind behind the committee is journalist Dimitris Kalapothakis, director of the Embros newspaper. The Revolutionary Committee helps decisively the struggle with guns and ammunition shipments as well as volunteer recruitments. In 1904, Labros Koromilas is appointed consul at Thessaloniki. The consulate becomes the center of the organization of the Macedonian struggle. The initiative of the Greeks leads the Bulgarian diplomacy to hasty decisions. On the 20th of July 1903, the revolt of Iliden erupts. Gruev triggers the events, and the news spread quickly from Achrida to Klisura and Kasoria. The slogan of the revolt was, "We are fighting against tyranny and racial prejudice in the name of freedom and humanism." Hilmi Passas, who was the general inspector of Monastiri, suppressed the movement using scattered armed groups who were responsible for the atrocities that followed. In the region of Florina, 68 civilians were killed and 390 houses were burned in the villages of Kratero and Alona.
In 1904, the government decided to send a secret mission to Macedonia. The four officers that were sent were Melas, Georgios Kolokotronis, Anastasios Papoulas, and Alexandros Kondoulis. They arrived at Korestia and Perikopi and moved on to Gavros, where they gathered the villagers and encouraged them.
On the 17th of March, they arrive at Roulia, where they meet with Kotas. From there on, they are touring the villages of Prespes and Adartiko, where they meet up with the lords of the region. On the 22nd of March, Melas is at Karies, where he meets up with the lords of the region and urges them to buy guns and use them when needed. There, a woman known as the Crazy One, initiated in the struggle, informs him that he must leave Macedonia at once.
Με οδηγούς τον πατέρα μου, τον Λάζαρο Τσάμι, τον Ανδρέα Γόγο και τον Ναούμ Παπαστεργίου και μέσω Βίγλας, φυσικά μακριά από το φυλάκιο των Τούρκων, φτάσανε στο Μπούφι, από εκεί πέρα κατέβηκαν στις Άνω Κλινές, πήραν από εκεί ένα λαντόνι, το παρουσίασαν στο φυλάκιο σαν έμπορα ασθενή και με το λαντόνι έφτασαν στο μοναστήρι.
On the 19th of July, Melas returns to Macedonia. He meets up with Karavangelis and with the help of his deputy commander, Lakis Pirzas, from Florina, and a 10-man force moves to Lechovo and Asprogia, where he helps the family of the murdered Strabaniotis. He then passes from Aetos and Nympheo and finishes off his second brief tour in Drosopigi. He stays in Athens only for a few days and on the 17th of August leaves again for Macedonia. With a 35-man force and again Pirzas as his deputy commander, they reach Polypotamos in Florina on the 14th of September. There, they meet up with Karalivanos men and move towards Lartiko to meet up with Kaoudis. It was then, on the 13th of October, when they found themselves at Statista in the pouring rain.
Ήσυχα ήταν τα πράγματα. Δεν θα συνέβαινε τίποτε εάν δεν ευρίσκονταν, δεν παρακολουθούσε την κίνησή του ο Μήτρος Βλάχος, αρχικομηταζής, και έστειλε μια γυναίκα στο φρουραρχείο των Τούρκων και είπε ότι τούτη τη νύχτα διανυκτερεύει εδώ το σώμα των κομιταζίδων του Βλάχου, του Μήτρου Βλάχου. Οπότε αποσπάσματα άρχισαν να κατεβαίνουν προς το χωριό. Πήγε μια ομάδα Τούρκων και στο κατάλεμα του Παύλου Μπελά, κινδύνευαν και οι άλλοι, συνέχεια χτυπούσαν τις πόρτες και φώναξαν μάλιστα να σας κάψουμε, ανοίξτε την πόρτα. Και τότε ο Στρατινάκης είπε, αρχηγέ να κατεβούμε κάτω διότι θα μας κάψουν ζωντανούς. Κατέβηκαν κάτω στο στάβλο και έπιασαν την πόρτα. Ο Παύλος Μελάς, δίπλα ήταν ο Στρατινάκης, ήταν ο Χατζητάσης και ο Ντίνας. Κάποια φορά ακούγεται κάποιος πυροβολισμός. Μετά ησύχασαν κάπως τα πράγματα και προχωρεί ο Στρατινάκης στο προάβλιο να δει τι συμβαίνει. Ο Παύλος Μελάς όταν πυροβόλησε είχε σκοτώσει κάποιον Τούρκο και ο Στρατινάκης πήγε να πάρει το όπλο του Τούρκου και την ώρα εκείνη βγήκε και πίσω από το Στρατινάκη ο Παύλος Μελάς, ο Ντίνας, ο Γαζιτάσης προχωρούσαν. Οπότε πήρε το όπλο ο Στρατινάκης από τον Τούρκο, αλλά ακούστηκε και ένας πυροβολισμός και μόνο. Αυτός ο πυροβολισμός είχε πάρει τον Παύλο Μελά στη μέση. Έπεσε κάτω ο Παύλος Μελάς, τον πήρανε και τον πήγανε στο ισόγειο του. Εκεί πέρα προσπάθησαν να το επιδέσουν το τραύμα, αλλά ήταν σοβαρό το τραύμα στη μέση. Μάλιστα είχε και ένα κεμέρι στο στήθος του και είχε λικάμποσες λίρες και έπεσαν χάμπου οι λίρες. Πονούσε πάρα πολύ και έλεγε, παιδιά σκοτώστε με, μην με αφήσετε να με πάρουν οι Βούλγαροι ή οι Τούρκοι, σκοτώστε με, δεν θέλω να ζήσω. Ο Λάκης του έδινε θάρρος, δεν σε αφήνω με στρατηγές στα χέρια, και πέθανε ο καημένος. Τον πήρανε, ο Λάκης ο Πύλιας σημάζεψε όλα τα έγγραφα και τα πήρε μαζί του και τον σιγά σιγά τον βγάλανε από το ισόγειο νύχτα, ενώ είχε ησυχία, είχαν αποτραβηχθεί οι Τούρκοι και τον πήγαν πίσω από το οίκημα όπου τον θάψανε πρόχειρα.
Melas' body will be preserved as a sacred relic on the Macedonian land, and his sacrifice became a symbol for the future struggle of his companions. In fact, the youth of Florina mourned him for 40 days, wearing a black armband. His personal belongings were kept intact and were delivered to his family by his close companion Lakis Pirzas. After Melas' death, the Cretan officer Yorgos Tsodos, Vardas, arrives in Macedonia and resumes his place as head of the exertion and sets his headquarters in Rosopigi. From 1903 to 1908, an unrelenting struggle takes place between the Greek rebel forces and the Bulgarian guerrillas. The Turks, following the politics of divide and conquer, interfered from time to time to restore the order. The Battle of Rosopigi on the 17th of April 1905, the Battle of Asproia on the 29th of May 1906, the Battle of Lechovo on the 14th of June 1907, and the Battle of Krystallopigi the same year show the efforts of the people of the Arcritic lands to gain their freedom. These were battles from which emerged a number of local heroes, rebels with an untamable faith in their cause, who with the support of the anonymous inhabitants of the villages endured their long struggle.
Οι χωρικοί υπέφεραν και από τις δύο ομάδες. Πότε πήγαιναν κομιταζίδες, τους λίστευαν, τους έπαιρναν με τη βία οτιδήποτε τρόφιμα είχαν και χρήματα ακόμη. Έφευγαν οι κομιταζίδες, πήγαιναν οι Έλληνες αντάρτες και αυτοί το ίδιο ζητούσαν τρόφιμα κτλ.
The footsteps of Kotas and Strabaniotis followed Pavlos Kyros from Antartiko, Pavlos Rakovitis from Krateró, Kotsopoulos from Vevi, and many more. They joined forces with Greek volunteers who became leading figures of the struggle, such as Karavitis, Dikonymos Makris, and Volanis. The final act of the Macedonian struggle is played again in Florina. It is the Battle of Piperitsa Keli on the 8th of July 1908. In the beginning of July, Niazim Beys, commander of the Resna battalion, arrives at Florina through Prespes and via railway moves towards Thessaloniki. Four days before, on the 4th of July, the revolution of the Neo-Turks breaks out in Thessaloniki, and two young officers, Enver Beys and Niazim Beys, force Hamid Sultan to restore the constitution of 1876, which ensured equal justice and representation of all nationalities and religious groups in the new government. The revolt was accepted with enthusiasm in Macedonia and led to the end of hostilities. But the hopes of the people of Macedonia will soon be proved false, since the movement's only purpose was to strengthen the national identity of the Turks. With the revolution of the Neo-Turks, the Macedonian struggle officially closes and is regarded as one of the most important of Hellenism for its national integration. It opposed the Bulgarian expansionism, kept the Greek element strong, and allowed Greece the ability to claim Macedonian land during the Balkan Wars. The success of the revolt is due to the fact that the population had deep Hellenic roots even if they didn't speak the Greek language. On the 15th of August 1909, a military movement breaks out at the barracks of Goudi. The main purpose of the revolt was the reorganization of the army. The political events that followed led to the establishment of Eleftherios Venizelos as a powerful political figure. It is true that between 1911 and 1912, the army is reorganized under the command of the French General Aidou. By the end of 1912, the conditions for the division of the disintegrated Ottoman Empire have matured. The Serbian and Bulgarian alliance is followed by the agreement of Venizelos with Gesov on the 29th of May. On the 17th of September, a general recruitment is declared in Athens. The army is divided in two large units. The unit of Thessalia, which included 7 divisions of 19,000 men, and the unit of Epirus. The heir to the throne and General Lieutenant Konstantinos is appointed general commander and established his headquarters at the Averophio School of Larissa. On the other hand, the Turkish army had a force of 40,000 men under the command of Taksim Pasas and the guidance of the German officer von de Goltz. The Turkish plan included the organization of the defense lines at the narrow passage of Sarandaporos, which was considered unbreachable. On the 5th of October, the Greek army passes Tynavos and moves towards Meluna mountain. Most of the guard houses were found abandoned and only a few resisted. The Greek forces reached Elassona easily by the end of the day. On the 6th of October, the 1st and 2nd divisions move encircling the Turkish forces, who lose the battle after 3 hours. The rest of the Greek forces moved northwest without facing any resistance. Only an Evzen battalion fought with the garrison of Deskati, and after a few hours the town fell in Greek hands. On the 7th of October, Konstantinos moves his headquarters to Hadjigogosin, and from there the signal is given to organize the attack at the passage of Sarandaporos, against the main line of defense of the Turks. At the dawn of the 9th of October, the Greek army marches. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd battalions, in the center, moved with difficulty because of the Turkish artillery, but with the help of the Greek artillery in the afternoon of the same day, they arrived at a small distance from the Turkish lines. On the 9th of October, the Turks retreated towards Servian Aliakmanos River, being afraid of the encircling movements of the 4th and 5th battalions. They left in such a hurry that they abandoned all the Turkish artillery of Sarandaporos at Servia. It is worth citing an unfortunate event that happened to the 5th Battalion during the Battle of Lazarades, when 3 Evzoni were killed because of an accident of the artillery. The above incident, along with the drowning of Sub-Lieutenant Kordis and 3 other troopers of the Greek cavalry at Aliakmonas, were the prelude to the miseries of the unfortunate battalion. On the 11th of the same month, all the forces of Thessalia moved to the banks of Aliakmonas, where they camp. After dusk, a small unit of the cavalry takes over Kozani without facing any resistance. On the 13th of October, the headquarters have been moved at Kozani. Konstantinos and his staff's intention is to move west towards Monastiri until they meet up with the Serbians. At that time, Venizelos, having been informed about the advance of the Bulgarians towards Thessaloniki, sends a telegraph to Konstantinos saying, "Your Excellency, I ask of you to submit your plan of action, taking into consideration that the army of Thessalia must occupy Thessaloniki as soon as possible." Konstantinos replied, "My plan is to move towards Monastiri, and I will do so unless you forbid it." Venizelos' answer was plain and simple, "I forbid it." On the 15th of October, the army moves according to the new orders and the main body goes east to Thessaloniki. Only the 5th Battalion of Colonel Matheopoulos will move northwest towards the Turks' new line of defense, which has been moved to Sorovitz and the pass of Kirlider Ven after Sarandaporos. Only one day later, they will be engaged in battle in the village of Perdikas with a force of 1,200 men and 200 scattered.
Δύο δημοσιογράφοι, οι οποίοι συνόδευαν την Πέμπτη Μεραρχία, καθώς και νεότεροι ερευνητές, αναφέρουν ότι η περιοχή από το Αμίντο έως την Πτολεμαΐδα και τα νότια της Κοζάνης την εποχή εκείνη κατοικούνταν από κονιάρους. Κονιάροι ή γιουρούκοι ήσαν ικανότατοι πολεμιστές, τους οποίους είχε φέρει από το εικόνιο της Μικράς Ασίας στην περιοχή ο Σουλτάνος Μουράτ ο Πρώτος.
The battle lasted until noon and Matheopoulos' losses were 56 dead and 339 wounded. The Turks retreated leaving behind 7 cannons, 200 containers of cannonballs and 1,000 prisoners. On the 18th of October, the battalion arrives at Amideo and after a short battle circumvent the resistance of Mustafa Pasas, who falls back to the plain of Linkistida. The Turks, who were afraid that if the 5th Battalion moved towards Florina and Pisoderi, they would encircle their forces, who were fighting against the Serbians at Monastiri, sent their defense lines at Vevi, the 6th unit of their army with General Javit, and double the numbers of the Greek forces, along with the elite force of Nazim Beys, known from the revolution of the Neo-Turks.
Στις 18 Οκτωβρίου 1912, η Πέμπτη Μεραρχία εισέρχεται στην περιοχή Αμιντέου και την απελευθερώνει για πρώτη φορά.
On the 19th, it moves north and after a short battle passes Kirlider Ven and finally reaches Vevi. On the 21st, the 5th Battalion faces strong Turkish resistance in the region of Vevi and Tlofos, where after a difficult battle with many losses, they are forced to retreat back to Aminto. On the 22nd, they face sporadic fire from the Turkish artillery, which was placed at Anemodarto and aimed at the Greek lines. The Greek artillery responded to the Turkish threat and the hostilities continued until 5 in the afternoon. On the 23rd, the famous Battle of Sorovitz takes place. At 9 in the morning, the Turkish artillery fires repeatedly against the Greek forces. Around midday, a successful counter-attack occurs directing the village of Petres.
Και φτάνουμε στην αποφράδα ημέρα της 24ης Οκτωβρίου 1912, που στοιχιώνει την ιστορία του ελληνικού μας στρατού. Ό,τι δεν κατάφεραν οι τουρκικές δυνάμεις όλο το προηγούμενο διάστημα κατά των ελληνικών δυνάμεων, το πέτυχε με μια παράτολμη ενέργειά του ένας Τουρκαλβανός αξιωματικός, ο Εσάτ. Ο Εσάτ πρότεινε στον αρχηγό των τουρκικών δυνάμεων, Τζαβίτ Πασά, να εκτελέσει παράτολμη και ρυψοκίνδυνη ενέργεια με λίγους άντρες και 4 μόνο πολυβόλα στα μετώπιστεν των ελληνικών δυνάμεων. Ο Τζαβίτ Πασάς με πολύ μεγάλη δυσκολία έδωσε την άδειά του για τη ρυψοκίνδυνη ενέργεια στον Εσάτ. Του επέστησε όμως την προσοχή να μην αποτύχει, διότι αλλιώς θα διέταζε τον τουφεκισμό του. Ο Εσάτ όμως προκάλεσε πανικό στις ελληνικές στρατιωτικές δυνάμεις και την άτακτη υποχώρηση και σύμπτυξη της Πέμπτης Μεραρχίας, τμήματα της οποίας έφτασαν μέχρι τα Σέρβια. ένας Τούρκος μπέης, ο Ισίν Χασάν, από τα χωριά Φανός και Ροδόνας της περιοχής, συνεργάστηκε με τις τουρκικές δυνάμεις και τους εγγυήθηκε πως θα βρει κατάλληλους οδηγούς για να τους καθοδηγήσουν στη διέλευσή τους μέσα από τον Βάλτο. Ο κυριότερος οδηγός για αυτή τη δουλειά ήταν ο γνωστός από την εποχή του Μακεδονικού αγώνα κομιτατζής Καρά Κομίτ, καταγόμενος από την περιοχή Παιδινού.
At 6:30 in the morning, the Turks passed the village of Rodonas and using boats and dry footpaths through the marshes, found themselves at Nea Komi behind the Greek lines. When they arrived, the dogs began to bark and the 5th Battalion sent vanguards to see what was happening. They informed their commander of what was going on in the village. The commander, showing unforgivable negligence, disregards the event, mocking them that they see Turks even when they are sleeping.
Ο ΕΣΑΚ λοιπόν το πρωί της 24ης Οκτωβρίου 1912 και συγκεκριμένα στις 6.30 έταξε τα πολυβόλα φτάνοντας βόρεια των ερειπίων της Νέας Κόμης στα μετόπισθεν του ελληνικού στρατού και συγκεκριμένα στο σημείο όπου ήταν εγκατεστημένος ο 5ος λόχος μηχανικού της 5ης Μεραρχίας.
Causing panic with continuous firing and shouting, he struck the Greek troops, who abandoned their posts and weapons, even their clothing. The Turks, confused, moved towards the lines of the 5th Artillery. They soon realized that they were going to resist. They only threw 10 shots before the commander of the artillery, Spiridon de la Portas, fell along with 2nd Lieutenant Athanasios Doukas. Another heroic attempt was that of the commander of the bridging order, who ordered the 2nd Battalion to come to the aid of the 5th Artillery Unit. They approached their positions, but were attacked by enemy fire and retreated. They did offer their help, though, to the healthcare department of the outdoor surgery and other departments during the retreat. A shining example of resistance is the response of the 6th Artillery Unit. Their commander, Theodoros Koskinas, refused to surrender his machine guns and the Turks executed him, along with Konstantinos Kathikouris, Nikitas Konomopoulos and a few others.
During those events, a large number of the local townspeople fled east and arrived at Servia, where they were temporarily accommodated. Amindio and Xenonero were burned.
40 κάτοικοι του Ξινού Νερού, οι οποίοι είχαν αρνηθεί να εγκαταλείψουν τις εστίες τους, συνελήφθησαν από τις τουρκικές δυνάμεις που εισήλθαν μέσα στο χωριό μετά την άτακτη υποχώρηση των Ελλήνων και τους έκλεισαν μέσα σε ένα στάβλο, τον οποίο τον πυρπόλησαν.
While the aforementioned events were taking place in the west, the main body of the army of Thessalia, after the victorious Battle of Yanitsa on the 20th, moves towards Saloniki and on the 27th march in the streets of the city. The mission that Venizelos had appointed to Konstantinos was a success. After the liberation of the city, Konstantinos and his companions were finally free to pursue their desire to move towards Monastiri. As a matter of fact, most officers were nurtured with the ideas of the National Company, and many of them had fought during the Macedonian struggle at Florina and Monastiri. They believed that the liberation of those regions would justify the sacrifice of Pavlos Melas and the rest of the Macedonian fighters that fell during the struggle. After all, the region had deep Greek roots and had paid a heavy price during the turbulent first decade of the 20th century. On the 1st of November, the order is finally given to free the areas north of Kozani. For this purpose, 4 divisions are activated. On their side, the 5th Division, which was recently regrouped under the command of Colonel Yanadis. The much-afflicted division, empowered with forces of Evzones, will be engaged in a 2-day battle at Komano against the Mustafa Pasas and Niazis. On the 4th of November, around midday, the Turks fall back defeated towards Amideo and Vevi. The troops of the division, whose spirits were crushed on the 24th of the previous month, were now high. The main body of the army, after freeing Edessa, moves towards Arnissa, where a strong defense line of the Turks was gathered. The 6th Division, being in a better position, took over and fought against the enemy forces in an area between Arnissa and Keli. On the 4th, the battle ends in victory, and 2 days later, on the 6th, another victorious battle at Keli this time is added to the trophies of the division of Colonel Miliotis Komninos.
Κατά την διάρκεια της αναμέτρησης με τους Τούρκους, ο Κομνηνός βρίσκει πολύτιμη βοήθεια από ντόπιους κατοίκους της Κέλης, οι οποίοι εξοπλισμένοι και υπό την καθοδήγηση του ιερέα του χωριού τους, Πέτρου Παπαναστασίου, επιτίθενται κατά των Τούρκων εκ των όπισθεν και επιφέρουν την ολοσχερή συντριβή του εκεί αμυνωμένου τουρκικού τάγματος. Μάλιστα ήταν τέτοιο το μέγεθος των εχθρικών απολειών, ώστε ο διάδοχος Κωνσταντίνος, απευθυνόμενος προς τον διοικητή του ευζωνικού τάγματος, είπε «Πώς τους ετήληξες τους καημένους τους Τούρκους και έκανες τέτοιο μαχαιριό, μωρέ Παπαδόπουλε?»
In the meantime, the 4th Division, under the command of Major General Moschopoulos, and after short scuffles, moved towards Grammatiko and the east bank of Egoritida Lake. The villages were found abandoned and they faced no resistance whatsoever. On the 6th of November, the vanguards of the division enter Amideo without any resistance. The entrance into the town is described by war correspondent Spiros Melas as such.
Leaving Kalardzi, we were walking towards Sorovitz, a town blessed by Bacchus, which was once prosperous. There grow the best vines of Macedonia, and whoever drinks wine from Sorovitz never forgets it. We found nothing but ashes. What was left of that once wealthy town was a few houses which stood by the black smoke, among them the railway station and the telegraph office.
The Turks had organized their defense with 3 battalions at the narrow passes of Klidi. There, Moschopoulos sent his cavalry with commanding officer of the squadron, Manos, along with 2 battalions of infantry, with the support of Kougetea's artillery. The battle was ambivalent, but when the artillery of Mangelopoulos arrived, the Turks left their positions and fled in panic towards the plain of Banitsa. It was the afternoon of November the 6th, and the headquarters of the division were settled at the railway station of Amideo. The same day, the 5th Division of Colonel Giannadis arrived at Sotiras and camped there.
Στις 6 του μηνός, ο μουφτής της Φλόρινας, Χουλουσί Εφέντης στο όνομα, ένας πολύ καλός άνθρωπος, όπως λέγαν όλοι οι παλιοί Φλωρινιώτες, διεπίστωσε ότι οι Σέρβοι είναι πιο κοντά στην Φλόρινα από ότι ο ελληνικός στρατός. Αυτός και οι μπέιδες και οι αγάδες της Φλόρινας θέλαν να παραδώσουν την Φλόρινα στον ελληνικό στρατό, γιατί λέγανε οι ίδιοι ότι από εσάς τα πήραμε, σε εσάς πρέπει να τα παραδώσουμε. Έστειλε 2 Τούρκους, τον Χατζή Αχμέτ Τζαφέρ και έναν άλλον μπέι, να πάνε στο Μητροπολίτη μας Πολύκαρπο, να τον παρακαλέσουν να πάει στο τζαμί της Φλόρινας να παρευρεθεί στη σύσκεψη την οποία πραγματοποιούσαν την ώρα εκείνη όλοι οι Τούρκοι προύχοντες. Ο Μητροπολίτης πήρε μαζί του τον γραμματέα Μητροπόλης που ήταν ο Τέγος Σαπουτζής μαζί με τον γιατρό Βαλάση Μενέλαο και πήγανε στο τζαμί. Έτσι απεφασίστηκε και δημιουργήθηκε μια επιτροπή η οποία θα πήγε να προσκαλέσει τον ελληνικό στρατό να έρθει να απελευθερώσει τη Φλόρινα. Με αρχηγό τον Παπαθανάση, ακολουθούμενος από τον γιατρό Βαλάση, από 5 Τούρκους, πήγαν και βρήκαν τον ελληνικό στρατό και επέδωσαν για τον διοικητή της 5ης Μεραρχίας που ήταν ο στρατηγός Γεννάδης ένα σημείωμα του Μητροπολίτη στο οποίο έγραφε ότι
Dear Commander of the Greek Army, I make known to you that our friends and allies the Serbians have seized Monastiri and moved towards Florina. The Turks of Florina pray that the Greek forces will hurry to the city and occupy it. They assure you that not they, nor the retreating Turkish forces will show any resistance.
Only a few miles northwest, at the north bank of the Gorita Lake, at Arnissa, Konstantinos had established the headquarters of the army. The same night, Yenimatas, the second in command of the squadron and sent by the Greek army to the Serbian staff, informs the general that all of Javid's army retreats south, ready to face the Greek forces.
On the 6th, Konstantinos gave out 3 orders. The first was at 9:30 in the morning. The 1st Regiment of the cavalry will move from Kelly to Vevi. 20 minutes later, he gives a new order that the 1st Regiment will go to Vevi and the rest will go to Aminteo Exino Nero. At 4 o'clock, he issues a new order that states that the 1st Regiment of the cavalry must siege Florina and go beyond the city. On the 6th of November, they spent the night at Kelly, near Kouroutsesme.
On the 7th of November, at dawn, the cavalry moves from Kelly to Florina. The city's population at that time was 6,500 Turks and 3,000 Greek residents. The squadron moves ahead with their commander Artis.
They arrived at Vevi. Following their orders, they sent a task force to Anoklines, Polyplatanos, as well as the village Brut that now belongs to Fyrom. Artis arrived at Armenochori, following the railway lines.
With a force of 10 men, Artis arrives at the railway station, which was then at Mesonisi, and occupies it along with 2 steam engines that were heading to Monastery. A precious spoil for the exhausted infantry who were fighting night and day and had already walked 300 miles from the beginning of the war. In the meantime, a regiment of the cavalry, led by Zacharakopoulos, had arrived at the city at the bridge of Ermenochori. There, they came face to face with the large forces of the Turkish army who were retreating from Monasteri. The two armies did not engage in battle. In fact, not even a single gunshot was fired. And while Zaharakopoulos refuses to enter the city, fearing that multiple enemy forces will wait there, Artis' intuition tells him of the enemy's broken spirits, and he decides to move towards the city with a force of 15 volunteers and the help of Panagiotis Nikolaidis, second in command of the squadron.
They walked all over the city and realized that certain segments of the Turkish army were retreating from Monasteri. They caught 1,229 Turkish soldiers and 4 officers, and among them a brigadier general.
The presence of 10 armed horsemen in the streets of the city was enough to cause the surrender of the Turkish forces. As Artis himself states, the only resistance that they faced was a rock that somebody threw out of a window and wounded his horse.
The people were hiding because many Turks from Ptolemaida that followed the retreat of the Turkish army had settled in the city. They were afraid of illnesses or scuffles upon the arrival of the Greek army. They found Georgios Moulis in the streets, who was shouting that the Greek army had arrived and the city was free.
When the religious leaders arrived, the Greek officer told them,
"In the name of King George I, I take over the city of Florina, and all its residents are from now on equal according to the Greek law."
Bishop Polycarpos answered thus,
"I surrender the city and praise the Lord that Florina is Greek again, and I swear my faith to the law and the king."
Mufti Mehmet Hulusi spoke next.
"We were favored by God and ruled the world, but we were led astray and become tyrants, and God is punishing us. Even now, He is merciful and delivers us in good hands. May He be blessed. We will be the most faithful subjects of King George."
So it appeared that Artis' reckless and against all reason move would save the city, since before an hour had passed from the surrender, the Serbian cavalry entered Florina.
A few hours later, the Serbians arrived in Florina and were delayed by chieftain Simos Ioannidis, offering them local treats. When he was informed that the Greek flag was waving at the metropolis, he accompanied the Serbians to the Turkish district, which is now called Kafkasica, due to the fact that after the population exchange, the refugees from Asia Minor were settled there.
A few minutes before, the reckless officer, sliding over the hierarchy, sent a telegram to the headquarters of the army saying,
"It is 5 p.m. 1 hour ago, I occupied the city of Florina, captured thousands of prisoners, troopers, and officers, and many machine guns of the enemy. I am in need of backup forces in order to establish vanguards and secure the city. The enemy is placed at the hills of Pisoderi. At your orders, Second Commander of the Squadron Artis."
Until midnight, the backup forces arrived under the supervision of Captain Prandouna's guidance. Artis had recruited 150 volunteers that helped him.
They continued their course, moving towards the west to the village that is called today Simos Ioannidis. They rested at night and continued the next day towards Vigla and Pisoderi until they reached Koritsa.
On the 8th of November, Konstantinos arrives in the city. The citizens of Florina celebrate it, throwing away the abominable fences, and run to the entrance of the city to meet Konstantinos in a delirium of excitement and cheerings. Civilians and troops headed towards the church of St. George. According to Tegos Apountzis, who was present, the speech of Bishop Polycarpos was extremely moving and full of patriotic notions. The headquarters were transferred to Florina, and Konstantinos stayed at the Metropolis Hall. In a little while, Prince Arsenios arrived at the city with a Serbian army.
The prince stayed at the building which accommodated the Association of Aristotelis. The Serbian army stayed in the city for a week. Meanwhile, the food and supplies dropped off and the authorities were afraid of illnesses. Besides that, the Greek authorities were afraid that the Serbians might ask their rights to the city, just as the Bulgarian did with Thessaloniki, and so they asked of them to leave because of the lack of room and supplies. In the meantime, the Turks were returning to the villages, and after the Serbians left as well, Florina remained Greek. The villages of Klines, Kladorachi, Polyplatanos and Niki fell to Serbian hands. Itia was divided between Greeks and Serbians, and Meliti was liberated by the Greek troops. "28 villages that today belong to Fyrom, such as Morichovo, which were Greek, were liberated by chieftains Tsitos, Braianis and Zois, and stayed Greek for a year.
The region of Prespes, along with 4 villages that today belong to Fyrom, were liberated by Vangelis Dimoulis from Agios Germanos, who was accompanied by a brave sergeant and a few riflemen that the commander of Pisoderi reluctantly gave to Dimoulis. Konstantinos will stay at Florina for 22 days, and from then on will organize new military operations. The last battle will be given by the forces of the 6th Division at Kristallopigi on the 2nd of December, when the Greek army marches towards Koritsa. On the 17th of May of 1913, a treaty is signed in London which typically seals the Greek dominion over Florina. After the treaty, the first round of struggles that lasted over a decade in the land of Florina ends, and a new one begins that will last for over 50 years and finally end in 1950 with the end of the Civil War. Half a century of battles, population exchange and immigration, of which the 31st years Florina stayed on the front line.